Everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Dr. Tim Pawl is back with us to discuss some of his recent work. He's been a busy philosopher lately with lots of cool stuff coming out. So we're going to talk about it. And Dr. Pawl, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, Pat, thanks so much for having me. It's always super fun to be here with you.
Yeah, so two books that I want to focus on, primarily on the first one, but I want to at least make sure that we mention two. You have a book out called Jesus and the Genome, which is really interesting and covers a lot of different stuff, which we're going to explore in this conversation. And then even more recently, you have the new Cambridge Companion to Christology, which I admittedly have not been able to spend a lot of time with this yet. I look forward to doing it, but it looks as lovely as any Cambridge Companion always does. So congratulations on the new publications. It looks like you're doing a lot of great work. Yeah.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, they were both great pleasures to work on. I did them both with Michael Peterson, another philosopher. The first one you mentioned also with an evolutionary biologist, Ben Bramall, as well. But Mike is just great to work with. I look forward to hopefully many more projects with him.
Yeah. Okay. So let me. We're gonna talk about Jesus and the genome first and most, and I want to start with a sort of just general question to get your posture on things. You know, it's a general like faith and reason, religion and science question. Because I was looking through your book and I'm like, oh, this is really interesting because this will dive into certain areas that have just been sort of an open but not too pressing concern for me. Mm-hmm. And that's what I want to talk, because I was talking with a friend the other day, very smart philosopher, and I'll keep him anonymous, but you know, he's considering Catholicism, and that totally surprised me, totally out of nowhere. And he's like, you know, it was just asking me questions, and then I was like, right away, and I always like do this. I'm like, look, I think I've got some good reasons I can give you, but if you, and I know how smart this guy was, I'm like, if you press me hard enough, I'm going to come to some question marks myself, right? Like we all have open concerns, if we're being honest. Like for me, it was always just a matter of, okay, the reasons I have in support are just not obviously outweighed by those open concerns. And the open concerns to me are more like puzzles and at most paradoxes, obviously not obvious contradictions, right? So puzzles like, okay, there's pieces here, I don't see how it fits together. To me, a paradox is something more like, that looks like that'll be hard to fit together, right? You know what I mean? And a contradiction is, I see that they don't fit together. I want to stay away from those, right?
Yep.
And I think I've got a few paradoxes, and one, you know, but like, I still like have confidence that there's a way to fit it together, right? And straight up, we're going to talk about one of is the Adam and Eve question, right? In evolutionary. And that's always just been an area for me. Like, I don't have an answer to this. Mm-hmm. I'm confident that this is right. I'm also confident that this is right. I haven't fit it all together. I believe somebody smarter than me probably can come up with at least a model to help do it. I'm going to go back to metaphysics, right? So my question for you is, what is your attitude towards that, right? Because we all have these open concerns. When does a concern become enough of a concern to you to address it? Do you just have a lot like in the background that just doesn't bother you? You're happy to let other people take care of it. Just curious, any thoughts you want to just talk about that general point would be awesome to hear. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great, thanks. And I do feel like you do about paradox and contradiction as well. It would be, to use a technical term, a bummer if you showed me that there was a contradiction in the Catholic faith.
Right.
If you show me a paradox, I will open a drawer and show you 15 more. You know, so
yeah, right on. Yeah,
that strikes me as the way to think about it too. As for which ones and what I do about them, there's this very specific sort of person who wakes up in the middle of the night sweating about something that Lateran IV said about the Trinity.
Yeah.
And I am exactly that sort of person.
You're the one, yeah.
There's one of us, it's me. And so that's where I feel like I'm going to spend my time. For one thing, and I hope this doesn't sound boastful, but I think the Lord's given me some predilections that do that sort of work well, the metaphysics and the dogma sort of work.
Yeah, for sure.
Plenty of other sorts of work that I don't have the special gifts for. So I'm not a particularly good historian. I'm not particularly good with languages. Mm-hmm. When someone raises a historical objection to Christianity or Catholicism, I typically think someone's got to answer that. But I know myself well enough to think I could try all day, and I'm not the right guy to answer that question.
Right.
So part of answering what gets me worked up and what I work on is based on what that sort of skills I think the Lord has given me, and I'm happy to defer to other folks for all sorts of things that aren't squarely in metaphysics, aren't squarely in dogma issues, which are the areas I like spending my time in.
Yeah, that's super wise, and I'm sympathetic to that. I think I'm pretty similar. You know, a lot of these questions, you know, as we're gonna get into, like, I'm not an evolutionary biologist, and I usually don't pretend to be one on the podcast, although I can do lots of things. So happy to allow for an intellectual division of labor there. Yeah, that's helpful, Dr. Pawl. Thank you. Okay, so Jesus and the Genome. What brought this project about? Why did you want to engage in this work?
Yeah, so this project came about, for me at least, because Michael Peterson, whom I mentioned earlier, he's at Asbury Seminary, Michael in Kentucky. Michael Peterson called me and said, "Hey, I'm working on this book called Jesus and the Genome, and I'd like you to be," I forget how he worded it, but basically like a content expert on the Christology portion of it. He already had a biologist lined up to be the content expert on the biology component. And Mike, of course, has done tons of work on philosophy of science. So he's the guy you want for that sort of aspect of the project. And so it was he and this biologist already working on it. And I thought, this sounds like a great idea. I don't know anybody who's got the skill set to do all three of these things together in one volume by himself. But I think the three of us together do have the skill set required to do this sort of project and to do it well. So that was the origin of me getting invited to it, saying yes to do it. And then it was just great fun. They're both really sharp guys. They both care about the faith. Neither one is Catholic. They're both, well, I think they're both Wesleyans. I know Mike is, but I'm not sure that's what Ben is. Something in the Wesleyan or maybe evangelical stream.
Okay, so that makes sense given some of what I've read before, which we'll get into. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and it's it's fun. It's fun doing this project in a sort of an intramural way. It was interesting to see what sort of tensions I brought in as a Catholic that they didn't perceive as tensions, or things that they wanted to hold on to that I was like, why would we do that?
Yeah.
It was fun, and it led to, I think, a betterment of the whole project in light of the extra guardrails, so to speak, that I brought in as a Catholic. Well, I can't actually say that sort of thing, or we got to say this sort of thing.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, that sort of is a nice transition right into I think the first big one, which I already gestured at, which is the question of Adam and Eve, or the historical Adam, or the little Adam. And so now, understanding a little bit more of your co-author's background, that makes sense, because you do a really nice job in this section, and I found it very helpful, because you kind of you map the terrain, or the space of options of where you can go with this. And now, if anybody is not familiar with the background here, let's just maybe set up the problem for us first, right? If somebody's like, is never, I guess, I can't imagine there's many of those people in the audience, but it's always helpful to have a little background that we can go from there, if you don't mind. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. In the book of Genesis, you find the story of Adam and Eve. And in that story, the Lord creates Adam, later creates Eve from a rib from his side. And then those two together are the humans in the garden. At some point, they sin, and then they're kicked out of the garden, and they have what's called original sin. They started with these gifts of grace, and it's not like their nature was itself destroyed, but it was diminished insofar as these gifts of grace were taken away, and no longer were their intellects in charge of their passions and things along these lines. And all of human race fell through them, because they were the father and mother of the human race. And then Christ, who came from that same line as well through Mary, redeemed all of the human race through acts of obedience and love. So that's like the general structure of the issue.
Yeah, good. So before we start getting into how to think about this, because and then evolutionary biology tension, right? This is where I kind of got the idea that, okay, I think that there's more than one position in this book that's not just Catholic. What is the Catholic minimally committed to here dogmatically? I think that's important to get clear on that first, and then that'll sort of constrain our space of options. Then we can explore beyond that for people who aren't Catholic, just for the sake of interest. But lay it out for us if you don't mind.
Yeah, happy to. So this was actually a fun discussion among the co-authors of this book.
I bet.
Because, the typical divide among Christians reading Genesis is between those who read it as something like a historical story of how the Lord actually brought things about. 6 consecutive 24-hour days of creation, and then you've got a literal Adam created out of dust, and then Eve literally created from his rib, and so on and so forth. And that sort of view is a view that none of the three authors of this book espouse. Like the 6 consecutive 24-hour day view is not our view.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't Augustine's view. Augustine wrote about this on the literal interpretation of Genesis, that doesn't even make sense to talk about days prior to the creation of the sun, and that happened on day 4. So like, what are you measuring days by on days 1 through 3? Who's there to measure them if you don't have humans around yet to measure them? So so none of us had that view. But what was, I think, maybe a bit surprising to the other authors was that Catholics have other things we're supposed to affirm that aren't this, that aren't the 6 consecutive 24-hour days. And so one of them, for instance, is monogenesis. We're supposed to think that there is in fact an original pair, an original Adam, an original Eve. When were they? Doesn't say. You can, when you look at the historical timeline, you can have a close Adam and Eve if you wanted to, I suppose. You can have a very far away Adam and Eve in the historical timeline. Doesn't say. What biological species were these two individuals? Could they have been Neanderthals? Could they have been some sort of antecedent to the Neanderthals, which both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals share? Doesn't say. As long as they're rational entities like me and you, made in the image and likeness of God, could be any sort of biological species. But the fact that we have to say there's two, an original pair, is something that I think typically Protestants who don't affirm the literalist reading of Genesis aren't inclined at all toward that position. Maybe they see it as a viable option, but they think, look, the Lord could have just as easily lifted up a whole community, like a whole breeding population of 3,000, say. He could have lifted all of them up into being humans and made in the image and likeness of God. So that's one thing we have to affirm, an original pair that typically Protestants don't have to affirm.
Yeah. So in one sense, the job might be a little bit tougher for Catholics here, because if as you explore in the book, there's non-literal interpretations, right? I remember, I know you say some stuff about Dr. Bill Craig's book in there. I did read that one, and he wants to affirm a literal Adam, and he also wants to sort of push it way back. And he's not Catholic, so he's not doing it for Catholic reasons. He's doing it for what he thinks are just straightforward biblical reasons, right? Okay, so all right. Well, let's go through it then. How do you think Catholics should think about this? And then just, because my audience isn't entirely Catholics, maybe we could explore some of the other options that are ventured in your book as well.
Sure. So this is just one way you might do it. Just want to espouse, this is not like there's a stamp for like official Catholic doctrine. This does not get that stamp. This is just one way you might think about it going.
Yeah, and actually, if you wouldn't mind, let me clarify the sort of way we're going to go about this here. I think it's important for people to have the right expectations, right? And it goes back to the paradox thing. I think sometimes it's enough to just say, here's one way that you might fit it together, right? It might not be the only way. And maybe that's all you can do, right? Like it's nothing even more than that, right? So like you wouldn't even, and certainly like this wouldn't be an argument for the faith, right? It's just an argument to stop you from abandoning it. So help us have the right expectations of what sort of project is going on here. I think that might be useful to have in the background. Yeah.
Yeah, good. So there first, and then to how to deal with the literal Adam.
Yeah.
I think you're totally right. This is not meant as a defense of the Catholic faith. That's not meant as an argument for it. It's not even meant to raise the probability judgment of somebody outside the faith that maybe the Catholic faith could be right. All it's meant to do is show that in response to this one particular problem, there's a way Catholics can answer it that doesn't lead to additional tension and resolves the tensions that the objector brings to the faith. So I think of it as a defensive maneuver, not an offensive maneuver, and hopefully not offensive, neither offensive or offensive.
Yeah, good. And you're great at that, especially from all your work in Christology. So yeah, please continue. What is one of these ways of alleviating the tension?
Yeah. My colleague, Kenneth Kemp, here at St. Thomas, he retired a couple years ago, but he's emeritus, so we get to still claim him, thankfully. Nice. Kenneth Kemp has written a bit on this, and I like his sort of view. He's careful. He's very historical in his work. And his view goes something like this. You have evolution playing out. However, it turns out evolution, in fact, played out up to a certain point. And then Ken thinks at that point, you have the Lord taking two hominids that are, well, our ancestors at some point, and raising them up with a rational soul, making them into still biologically like the hominids that they're immediately surrounded by, but importantly, different insofar as they have rational souls. On Ken's view, then, these ones propagate in, and their their descendants have this great benefit over the others in that population, namely they're rational. If that ability to be rational is transferable through descent, so to speak, it's going to lead to those who are descendants of the original pair having a great leg up on the survival game, as opposed to those who don't have that pair in their ancestry because they won't be rational. And so he claims there'd be an easy propagation over, I forget how long he says. He actually worked with a mathematician here on this, and how long it would be before you have it spread throughout the entire gene pool in the area. Mm-hmm. If you put that sort of story early enough in the history of hominids, you'll find that you'll get us all before the expansion out of Africa. Mm-hmm. You know, that is to say, you'll if you put it too late, if you put it just, say, in Scotland at a certain time, it's hard to see how the Asians would get this benefit, the rationality benefit. But the earlier up, or the earlier chronologically you put it, the easier it is to spread it throughout the entire human race. And so for Ken, it's an early Adam and Eve, and it's an evolutionary story until God zaps into soul. And then, in a lot of ways, an evolutionary story thereafter, too.
Yeah. Do you think, with respect to just, looking at this outside of just, a model that alleviates tension, that there's any way to either support it, like from what we currently know, or even just take it down, like empirically? Or do you think it's just kind of beyond that realm right now?
Yeah. I'm not sure is the short answer. You would need to have some way of showing, or showing it to be true or showing it to be false, that there was this initial injection, so to speak, into the world of rationality to these two beings. I don't know how you would show that through any sort of evolutionary data that we have, or even really that we're likely to get in the future. Maybe if you could show, and I'm not saying you could, but if you could show that rationality isn't the sort of thing that could arise through merely evolutionary processes, insert how, Lord knows how. If you could show that, then I guess that would be some way of showing some evidence that it got there from somewhere outside of the evolutionary process. And that isn't definitive that it got there through a God zapping event, but it makes it, I guess, more likely that it got there through a God zapping event.
Yeah, good. Okay. Just for the sake of exploration, what other even if you're outside the bounds of Catholic commitments here, what other models do you think are interesting or worth mentioning for Christians for thinking about this?
Yeah, when Peter Van Inwagen tells the story, I think it's in this book, The Problem of Evil, that little blue book, which is wonderful.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. Yeah.
He's got his tale has it where it's a grand raising, so it's a raising of a whole community, and that whole community somehow falls into sin, led by its leaders somehow, but it falls into sin. You could think of it like the Jews at, what is it, Bath Peor in the Old Testament, where they fall into sin after they worship the idol. I guess that would be a good one too, I suppose, though, where you have a whole community together falling into sin. So he thinks of it as something like that. I think that's a more likely sort of view. If you're prescinding from the Catholic sort of view, it's more likely than a polygenesis view, where you've got humans coming to existence over here, and then humans coming to existence over here, like on different continents, different origins of different species that can still interbreed. I think that's a less likely story, harder to fit with lots of traditional Christian claims like original sin. Hard to see how it would get from point A to point B if there was an ancestry through it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know that there are some that want to hold on to literal Adam, but not original sin as well. So,
right. Yeah, it's tricky.
And there's lots of positions out there.
It's tricky too, because you read Eastern Fathers, And on the one hand, it looks like they don't like original sin.
Mm-hmm.
Don't like sounds pejorative. I just mean that
Yeah,
they
yeah.
don't affirm original sin. But on the other hand, you read the things they say about what happened to Adam and Eve as a result of the fall,
Mm-hmm.
and it sure sounds like something we would call original sin. The removal of graces, the need for a savior, it's spread through all of humanity such that no one outside of Christ can be saved. And
Mm-hmm.
well, yeah, I mean, what do you guys call that? Like that sounds like you're describing the effects of original sin.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Good. Okay. Any final words about this particular, issue or segment of your book before we move on to the next one?
No, just that it was a joy to work on with Protestant guys. I think we all stretched a bit to think through it together, and I'm happy with the way it turned out.
Yeah, it's good. And again, I love that you just sort of map the space and say, here are some ways you can think about it, and give certainly enough detail to show its plausibility and make it interesting, but you don't like firmly come down on any one of. So I like that sort of thing. It's helpful, but also appropriately modest. So well done.
Thanks.
All right, I want to turn now next to a big one, which is problem of evil related stuff. Probably the biggest and most classic objection to belief in God and religion in general. But there's a particular, variety of the problem of evil, right? That tends to focus on presumably, gratuitous evils. And this often gets specified in relation to evolution, just the nastiness of the process, right? Like, God brought about, us, maybe we were good to bring about, but did he have to do it in such a nasty way, right? And then, you get all the nature red and tooth and claw and the details. And the idea here is, this is supposed to be, minimally attention, right? I mean, I think some thinkers want to say it's worse than that this is some sort of contradiction. But set out the problem as you understand it and as it's specifically, entertained in your book. And then let's see if we can think through it here, Dr. Pawl. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Real quick, when you talk about this explanation for suffering, were you thinking a contrastive case between the Christian responses to it and naturalistic responses to it? Or are you thinking something more like the problem of animal suffering?
Yeah.
Not really one that we raise in the book.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, so like what best explains it? I think that's the one that's relevant to your book. But of course, I would welcome any general thoughts you have at all. But we can push that down the line. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah. So when I think of the Christian versus naturalistic responses to things like suffering, let me approach by way of a story, and I promise you it will become relevant. But pinky promise. It starts here. It starts in the mid-'90s in my friend Fro's garage. His name was also Tim, so we called him Fro because that was part of his last name. Mm-hmm. But he and I would get together periodically, and we lift weights, and it was super fun. I know you're a guy who likes lifting weights. Mm-hmm. So we would lift some weights. It was super fun. And afterwards, I'd go home and I'd take a shower, and I would tell him either that day or the next day, I'd say, my arms hurt so bad from lifting out from all those military presses that I could barely get to my hair to shampoo my hair. Mm-hmm. He'd say, oh man, me too. It was so awesome. And it was kind of awesome, and the reason why it was awesome, though it was suffering, the reason, and I didn't like the suffering aspect of it. The reason why it was awesome was, even if that pain wasn't constitutive of the good I was looking for, like being ripped, even if the pain wasn't constitutive, it was at least something like a sign of work being done in me. So it showed to me that the sort of goal I had in mind was being completed. If today I had woken up and I tried to wash my hair in the shower and I had that very same pain in my shoulders and I could barely reach my hair, I would call an ambulance. Something is definitely wrong with me. Mm-hmm. Same sort of pain, but in one case, I've got an explanation, a broader explanation for why it could come to pass, where it's a sign of a goodness coming about. And in this case, where it's me right now, no such explanation, no sign, just fear and despair. Now, I think that it's something similar here with suffering in the world, too. For instance, when Christians pray, we often get a feeling of peace or consolation, but we don't always. And the Christian tradition has said sometimes the Lord will remove that peace or consolation, will leave you in dryness, mm-hmm. or desolation even sometimes. He'll leave you there, and it's good for you in the following respect. It's good for you because your goal in love should be aimed at the giver of the gift, not the gifts itself.
Right.
It shouldn't be set on the joy, it should be set on the union with
Mhm.
Christ. And so here too, I find in my own prayer life, when I'm feeling dry about prayer, I remind myself this too, while it's a suffering, this too can aim at a good. And I know what sort of good it aims at. And even if it isn't constitutive of that good, even if it doesn't itself make me more holy or make me closer in union with Christ, it can in fact be a sign that I'm growing in union with Christ because I'm eschewing the gifts and looking more toward the giver. Now, I bring up those two just sort of by way of analogy. A lot of times in suffering in life, we don't see the good. So in that respect, it's disanalogous to the first two cases. I see the good of the arms that are sore,
Yeah.
and I aim at that good intentionally. And I accept the suffering because I see it as a sign, maybe even a necessary condition for the good I'm aiming at. In cases of suffering in the world, I don't quite have that because very often I don't see the good involved. I see this terrible thing happening. I don't know why the Lord allows it to happen. But if I believe that God works all things to the good of those who love him, I at least have his promise that there's some good there. And so while I don't know why it's happening, I at least have this sort of reassurance that it's happening for good. It's not like I woke up and I try to wash my hair and I just can't and I'm scared about it.
Yeah.
It's that I know there's some good there. I just don't know what the good is, unlike the washing case. Now, I think that's disanalogous to naturalism. As a Christian, I don't know what the good is, but at least I know there is one, and I can hope in that good. And that's a different sort of response to suffering. It's I think it feels better, not
Certainly.
feeling, but it's a more livable response. It can help you get up in the mornings. It can fight despair and depression. On the other hand, I think the naturalist not only doesn't have the question mark, what good could this be for? The naturalist has a pretty good reason to think there is no good for at least a lot of these evils that occur. So it's not like me not knowing why God allows it. It's him knowing there's no God, or at least believing there's no God to allow it. And so I think if I just compare the naturalist versus a Christian response to suffering, to me it seems that the Christian response has a lot more going for it for a lived life than the naturalist response does. So that's the sort of direction we go in the book with respect to comparing and contrasting those responses to suffering.
Yeah, that's good. And I think that's all definitely right. Is that just from a practical, livable standpoint, the Christian one is deeply to be preferred. I mean, like I'm happy to say, like, yeah, it feels better. People will be like, well, you shouldn't base your worldview on feels. And I would like to say, well, I don't entirely do that, but if I already have good reasons to think that God exists, and I don't think that the evils of this world, including all of evolutionary history, are strictly incompatible with God, then yeah, I'm gonna tuck right into that, right? And I'm not gonna feel bad about it either. And we can always hold the motivated reasoning charges can always cut in both directions when you think about it long enough as well. With respect to then like the evidential weight of the suffering in the the evolutionary process or what have you, this is better expected on or better anticipated by the Christian worldview or the naturalistic worldview. What are your thoughts on that? Is that a point that you just concede, but then you say, well, overall the reasons are better for the Christian worldview, and I'll just take the hit there? Do you think it could be neutralized? Do you think it could be reversed? Is this an issue that you've have a settled mind on at all, or any general thoughts? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I haven't yet seen a good case made that you can get the other goods of the world, like the uniformity of the world, the causal uniformity we see in how things work. I don't yet see you could get that sort of thing and the sort of beings we are without having the sort of history that leads to us. I mean, maybe you think God could just zap the world into existence as it was 10,000, 100,000, a million years ago and excise a bunch of that history from it. And, I bet he could, but he'd either be a deceiver or we'd find in the history some like rank stop of how things have been going. You know what I mean? Like, if it were recent enough, you'd find no more circles in the trees. You'd find trees with, just circles start growing at the mark or whatever it might be. So I think God could do such a thing, but there'd be loss in doing such a thing. And my thought is, I don't know how to weigh the goods that are lost there and the goods that are lost and the way he in fact did it, and to compare.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That reminds me of Van Inwagen, right? Because he says that it's at least not clear to me that the alternative to his defense, which he calls a massively chaotic world, isn't like at least as bad, if not worse, right?
Yeah.
than this one. And I'm very sympathetic to that. I guess I go stronger though, because I don't hold that like just because you can imagine something that at all gives you any reason to think that it's possible. I think there's hidden necessities all throughout the world. And I'm like inclined to various degrees of origins essentialism and stuff like that. So if the moment somebody says, well, God could have done it this way, I'm just extremely skeptical of that, right?
Yeah.
As skeptical as I would be that God could make a man without a height or something like that, So like maybe that's just me, not that it won't have force for everyone, but yeah, just at least with like considering far out possibilities.
Yeah.
I don't know. Doesn't do it for me,
Color you dubious. Yeah.
Yeah, color me dubious. That's right. Yeah. So good. All right. Awesome. All right. Next one I want to touch on with you is the big one of morality and evolutionary biology. So yeah, set the stage on this one for us, Dr. Pawl. What are we thinking about here? And then let's think about it. Yep.
Yeah. Good. I mean, that's way better than thinking about it than talking about what we're going to think about.
Yeah, which I sometimes that's the order I sometimes go in.
This is the right order. Yeah. Here's a worry some folks have. If Christianity were true, then there'd be some objective moral truths that we could know about. For instance, the teachings of Christ, his teachings were rife with moral truths like you shouldn't commit adultery and you shouldn't murder and other sorts of things, which weren't just given, you think, to the listeners, but like in the Old Testament, in the Ten Commandments, and even before that, in the laws of Noah, are given to the whole world. At least the laws of Noah are given to the whole world, and they include don't murder. So all that to say, if Christianity is true, there's some objective moral truths we can know. Now, some folks think that that's false, and they think it for evolutionary reasons. So for instance, Richard Joyce has this book called The Evolution of Morality, in which he writes, he first thinks that our moral beliefs came about purely through evolutionary causes. And he secondly says, quote, our moral beliefs are products of a process that is entirely independent of their truth, end quote. And you can probably see why that is. If moral beliefs came about through the evolutionary process, and that process is aimed at survival and fitness and not necessarily aimed at truth, you can see how truth would take a back seat to having moral beliefs about survival and fitness. So likewise, Sharon Street has written about this, and she's written, quote, the realist about morality, the person who believes in objective moral truths, the realist must hold that an astonishing coincidence took place, claiming that as a matter of sheer luck, evolutionary pressures affected our evaluative attitudes in such a way that they just happened to land on or near the true normative views among all the conceptually possible ones. End quote. So in both these thinkers, you see the general thought is evolution has given us our moral beliefs, and evolution isn't aimed at truth here. It's aimed at survival. The truth is incidental or takes a backseat. And so you're not going to find that you're going to have objective, reliable moral beliefs about things. But if Christianity is true, we are going to have some of those. If evolution is true, we're not going to have some of those. So if Christianity is true, evolution is false, and vice versa, that would be a pretty big tension between the two, if it turned out to be true. So that's just the general setup. What do you think of all of that?
Yeah, I think it's good. I think it's a good tension to think about. So I'd like to hear your preferred way of thinking about it now, if you don't mind.
Yeah, happy to. So I think of it like this. First, I'm dubious that we can give an evolutionary explanation of morality in the manner I just described. If we give an evolutionary explanation, it's going to be tied to something like survival or fitness. And I think there's a lot of actions that we all would accept to be moral, which aren't themselves tied to evolution or fitness or survival. And there's some that we would judge to be immoral that are quite good for fitness and survival. Mm-hmm. So to give just one example of that latter type, the former type is noble actions like jumping on a grenade in the foxhole. There you might think the guy did a good deed. We give him a posthumous award for doing it, and yet it didn't really lead to him or anybody you say they're not related to him in the foxhole. Didn't lead to survival or fitness.
Put aside the extremely contrived Just So story, right?
Right. Yeah,
we know they're out there. Right? Yeah.
On the other hand, think about a case like this. There's this Netflix documentary called Our Father, which you may have seen.
I have not.
And it's about an Indiana, what do you even call this guy? Reproductive doctor, sperm bank office doctor guy.
Okay.
I think is a technical term for it. And he used his own goods to impregnate 90-some women that we know of. Could be even more. But and he did it duplicitously. So he's impregnating all these women with his own semen, not using their partner semen or the semen they've chosen from the catalog. I don't know how you do it, but he's been using his own goods. Now, in that situation, that action is quite good for him with respect to his fitness and the propagation of his own genes. I mean, he's like a saint. He's very, very moral, if morality is measured by this sort of fitness enhancing measure. But of course, none of us think that what he did was even good. We think it's pretty duplicitous and wrong to do that to people. So the tying of morality to fitness enhancement is, I think, going to be a pretty tricky road to take if you want to say that you want to keep our pre-theoretical intuitions about what the noble acts are and what the ignoble acts are in place. I think you probably can't do it.
Yeah, good. I guess thoughts on this, like, to me, this has been one of those things that was never much an open concern. I wonder if I'm like just being like too easy about it. It's like, hey, if God exists and Christianity is true and he's behind the evolutionary process, clearly there's going to be certain constraints on it, even if we don't know where those constraints are, right? Mm-hmm. And then you can tell any sort of story of moral epistemology and ontology and just tie it in right there, right? It seems like the real only problem is when you just have like an unbounded or unconstrained view of the evolutionary process. And to me, that's just like, that's a higher level argument. That's not a scientific one, not really, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think the Christian like has to say something about it, but it's like, yeah, no, if God wants to bring us about this way, and especially if a lot of what goes on in moral reasoning is non-physical, which I think is actually the case, right? I guess maybe it should it bug me more, Dr. Pawl? Is there something I'm missing here, right? Should this be more of a concern for me? I don't know. You tell me. Yeah.
Well, let me say two things. Let me say first, I think for you, it should not be more of a concern. Mm-hmm. I think secondarily, there's a large swath of people for whom it should be a concern. And I think it should be a concern for those who are naturalists. So for those who think that there's no God or anything like God and don't want naturalists who want to explain evolution. Sorry, even better, naturalists who want to explain morality solely by means of evolutionary theory. Yeah. If you're in that bucket of people, it's going to be an uphill battle to explain these things. And there are people in this, in that group. And so they're going to have a pretty hard go of it, in my estimation. You, though, not being in that group, don't have nearly as hard of a go for explaining non-evolutionary reasons for having the moral beliefs that you do.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you're a naturalist, it sort of naturally flows towards an anti-realism. And I think it's worse than that. I think it's a kind of catastrophic skepticism. Naturalists don't agree with that. I understand before the comments come flowing in. I understand that that's not a position they just want to accept lying down, right? But right. I do think that that's a serious problem. In the same way that I think that the Christian has to tell a problem about, it's like in one sense, the question is, how do naturalists get anything right, right? In another sense, for the Christians, how do they get anything wrong, right? Both have to tell a story about that, right? I just think that one is easier to tell, maybe not easy to tell, but one is just easier to tell than the other, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me say just a bit about the sort of dialectic we're in this discussion. Not so much me versus you, but just in general, me and you on the one hand, and maybe in the naturalists on the other hand. And then I want to tie it back into this discussion about morality of evolution of morality. I keep switching those two around, but the evolution of morality. The thing I want to say about the dialectic is here we're not asking if both these things are true, the data from evolutionary science and the Christological, or more generally the Christian views of traditional Christianity. We're not asking if both are true when we have this discussion. The book is meant to say that you could affirm both, and there's no strong tension between the two. Now, the tension question is one that the truth question is sort of irrelevant to. I mean, here's what I mean. If you say to me, Tim, could Mormonism, or could a Mormon be a Democrat? Say you ask that question. Is Mormonism consistent with democratic social theory? And suppose I say to you in response, Mormonism is false. And you say, well, yeah, I know you think Mormonism is false, but I'm not asking you whether you think it's true or false. I'm asking you whether or not you could affirm both without a contradiction in that affirmation of both.
Yeah.
And if I respond again, just saying, well, no, because Mormonism is false, so you can't affirm Mormonism, so you can't affirm the conjunction of the two, you'd say, oh, you're missing the whole point, guy. I've invited you to a certain dialectical position, and you've declined my offer by not even being willing to assume for argument's sake that your opponent's theory could be true in this discussion. So one way to fail in this dialectic is just not being willing to even accept for argument's sake the position of your interlocutor. Like earlier when we were talking about suffering, if the person said, but yeah, dummy, there is no God to make things better. Like, you know, there is no sky fairy up there who's going to give you a way of seeing how the suffering work to your greater good. He's missed the whole point of the discussion. Right. I'm not asking him to believe in a sky fairy. I'm asking him, if Christianity were true, could you give an account of this?
Yeah.
And he should at least be able to see the conditional. If he can't conditionalize, he's got to do more logic, I guess.
Or plumbing.
Or both. Yeah. So bring that back to this discussion. One thing I wanted to say, one way to screw up this dialectic is to be unwilling to assume with your interlocutor the truth of the two things he asks you to test for consistency. And we saw a way of failing that earlier. A second way to screw it up is to tacitly smuggle in something else that leads to the tension between the views. If I say to you, hey, is A consistent with B? And you sneak in C, and C is inconsistent with B, that group of A, B, and C, of course, won't be consistent. It'll be in tension. But that's just because you smuggled something in. Now, that's relevant here for the following reason. I think there's an argument to be given that goes like this. There is no good, this is the first premise, there is no good evolutionary explanation for our knowledge of objective morality. Conclusion, therefore, there is no good explanation for our knowledge of objective morality. And when you hear that argument, you should think, wait a second, that's not valid yet. You need another premise in there to get me a valid derivation. You need something like, any good explanation for our moral knowledge must be an evolutionary explanation. And if you have that, if you have it's got to be an evolutionary explanation, there isn't one of those, therefore there's no good explanation. I get it. But notice you've smuggled in a premise that any good explanation has to be an evolutionary one. And of course you're going to find a tension between the Christian worldview and the findings of evolutionary biology if you smuggle in a sort of naturalism into the picture.
Yeah, of course.
There's a tension there. So all that to say, in this dialectic, you got to just be careful you get all the premises given to you, because I find often one of the premises is a sort of the only way we get to know good stuff is through science sort of claim. And while science gives us lots of good things to believe, I don't see any reason yet given from science that science is the only way to get your knowledge.
Right. Yeah. Sort of crude scientism. Not a fan of that. Right. And that's not to say that we don't think science tells us a whole lot. It certainly does. But there's a difference between something being powerful and it being exhaustive. So that's good. That's very helpful. That's good. So all right. So that's good. I guess I don't have to be any more concerned about that than I was previously. Always good to leave with fewer rather than more concerns. Right. But I also at the same time understand, like, this is a live issue for a lot of people. It's just kind of funny how that works. Sometimes our intellect will just attach to one thing that just bothers us for some reason, and other things just bothers a bunch of other people, and it's like I just don't see it, right? Yeah.
Some worldviews will give you a real doozy, like a naturalistic worldview where you're trying to explain everything through purely evolutionary biology, everything with respect to morality. Hands you a real doozy, and I can see it, and that's a problem for you guys. But of course, I don't feel it because I don't affirm the premises by which you get to the problem.
And it is interesting to see this sort of the evolution, if you will, of naturalism, right? I think so many feel the weight of these issues, and so many do not want to be anti-realists that they just naturalism becomes increasingly more exotic. It seems by the day. Whereas, and to me, I think that the problem there is it's sort of like it sort of undermines or cuts against what was one of the big motivators for naturalism, which is that we can just science it all, right? So the sort of more exotic you make your naturalism, the less you kind of move away from that sort of scientific picture, and I think the less motivation you actually have for naturalism at that point. Which I got fair. I guess you could do that. I just it's hard to get a grip on some of these positions because they're just evolution, right? It's just they're evolving, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes I like to think to myself, I put myself in my opponent's shoes and then try just for a while to think through how best I would respond to the objections. I think a lot of philosophers do this sort of thing.
It's a good exercise.
And so for I put my naturalist hat on, and then I say to myself, what would I say when I see that it's really hard to square all these pre-theoretical thoughts we had about, say, whether it's right and just to do X and not Y? How do I square that with my inability to ground that in the origin of humans, the way I understand the origin as a naturalist? And there I think to myself, maybe the best response I would give is something like an error theory, where I say, it's not surprising even a little bit that the stuff you walked into the room with is not what's actually right about how the world works. Like, why would you expect you, given your history, the purely evolutionary history, why would you expect you to have gotten any of this stuff right about what really is morally true or false, about the distant modal possibilities? Who do you think you are? Like, you're just an evolved hominid of a certain type. You probably wouldn't get that stuff right, and you probably wouldn't even evolve to have the skill set to get that stuff right, because you don't need it for the sort of stuff you do. Just like you don't need to see 3 miles. You haven't evolved to see 3 miles. You just need to see close enough. Well, likewise, you don't need to think 3 miles away with abstract thoughts. It makes sense to me. So maybe if I were, keeping my naturalist hat on for a moment, I guess I'd probably go that way. I'd be initially unwilling to give up the moral claims, but then I'd maybe make peace with it and thinking I didn't really have a good reason to think them in the first place. They were just intuitions based on, evolutionary antecedents that weren't aimed at getting me the right views on this stuff anyway.
Yeah, no, I feel the weight of that for sure. I guess I would just, and even from personal experience, I just feel the weight of those sort of the Morian weight of it, of those, that I would just be so sooner give up naturalism, right? But to each their own, right? But
I feel like there's a Modus Tollens ejection seat, like if naturalism is true, then all this moral stuff might be out the window. And I think here at my kitchen table, maybe that's right. And then I go out and get cut off in traffic, or, like suppose somebody slaps your kid, or you're gonna Tollens that ejection seat real quick and thinking, oh, he did something wrong. Like it's objective. That was wrong.
Yeah, done deal. Awesome. All right, so this next section I did not read of your book, so this will be a surprise to me to hear it, but I'm super interested. You tackle the miracle of the virgin birth. So let's do the same procedure here. What's the problem? What are we thinking about? And then how do we think about it? So I'm sure this will be good stuff. Yep.
Yeah, good. So here we tried to start with all the relevant Christological claims and all the relevant biological claims that we could find to this. So the relevant Christological claims, you find them primarily in the Gospel of Luke, how Jesus was Mary was overshadowed by the Holy Spirit, became pregnant with Jesus, and not through any sort of instrumentality of man or through sex. Okay. And you also have all these evolutionary findings about how, in fact, humans get brought to be in the first place. Okay. And one thing we find is you don't get humans without propagation through the standard sexual means. Even if you think some species do pop off asexually, humans don't do that. And even when you find mammals doing that sort of thing, which is quite rare, it's never male mammals that are the propagation or the offspring, because the Y chromosome isn't there in the female to be given to the male in that sort of situation. So it looks like you just can't explain how it could be possible that you have a virgin birth is the thought.
Mm-hmm. Great. All right. Let's think further about that thought then. Yeah.
Yeah, so in the book, we consider, again, just like the other areas you talked about, we lay open some possibilities.
Yeah, good.
So you might think of it in any number of ways. There's a view that we pick up just to set aside that I was never quite happy with, but we thought maybe we should keep it for someone to think about. But I think of it as the Holy Spirit courier service, where what the Holy Spirit does in the incarnation is perform a courier service of typical male seed from somewhere to Mary, and then at that point, biology just plays its regular role in the propagation and the birth of Jesus. So I call it a courier service because there's not like a new thing made. It's just a transit service.
Yeah.
Now I raise it, like I just said, just to set it aside. You find that nowhere in Christian tradition. I think it probably sounds odious to pious ears, and I get why it is, but it's available in logical space at least. So we raise.
I have not heard of that one before. It's interesting.
Some people I've listened to talk before want to make it somebody like, if you want it from the line of David, you have some Davidic ancestor who gets it from, so to speak. In any case, leave that where it is. A second sort of view I think of as a homunculus view. This is where the whole embryo is implanted into Mary. So no typical maternal bits or bobs gets into the process at all. And that sort of view you could hold, and you see like traditional religious art. Some of it has a little bit in the Annunciation, like a little baby Jesus coming toward Mary's bosom, her womb. I'm not super fond of that one either. The reasoning is that it's supposed to be the case that Mary gave him his what's called fleshy matter. The components were supposed to be Marian. A couple of church fathers write about this and say if it wasn't Marian, he's not from the line of David, and if he's not from the line of David, he can't do what the prophecies say he has to do. So I like this sort of view where you have the material components coming from Mary, and yet the Holy Spirit doing some sort of work in the incarnation. If the Holy Spirit is doing no work, if the divine's doing too little work, it's more like the courier service project, I think. The Holy Spirit's going to do some important work there. So the sort of view I like is a two sources sort of view, where you have the material components coming from Mary, and then the reformation of them, recombination into what you need for a fetus coming from the Holy Spirit. One worry here, which I'll raise and then defeat, and then I'll stop talking and let you respond.
This is good.
One worry is that, like I said earlier, she doesn't have a Y chromosome, and so where are you going to get one of those bad boys from in the embryo? And I think a good answer there is that chromosome is itself created and composed of all of a bunch of bits and bobs, like 92 million base pairs or something like this. And those are all available in Mary. So while she doesn't have a Y chromosome, she's got all the stuff that a Y chromosome is composed of. And so the Holy Spirit could reorganize that stuff within her, and in doing so, get what's necessary to produce a male offspring. Let me stop there. There's other things to object to and respond to, but what do you think of all that business?
I mean, I like it. This is definitely one of those areas that I've spent probably less than 2 minutes ever thinking about, because it's like realm of the miraculous, right? So as long as I think like I've got some reasons to think that miracles could happen, and there's good reason to think that this one did happen, I don't know. Is this an area I should be more worried about? Are there many lurking contradictions here that I'm unaware of, or something like that?
No. So personally, this is one that I find least persuasive. And here's why. Remember where we are dialectically, and remember the two cardinal sins of a dialectic about compatibility. One of which is just presuming the falsehood of the view of one of the views in question, and the second is smuggling in some third view, which does the work of causing the tension. Well, if you're granting me the possibility of a creator God already, and you are, if you're granting me the possibility of the Christian doctrines and asking whether they're in tension with evolutionary biology, if you're already granting me that there could be a God that creates stuff, I don't see how you can say, well, he can create the whole darn world, fine, but he can't create, the Y chromosome. That's impossible. I think your objection is coming too late. If that's the objection you want to press, you should press it not in this dialectic about the compatibility of the two, but in a discussion about whether it's even possible for there to be a God.
Yeah, or a creator in the first place, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. A creator in the first place, yeah. So one way that I see these arguments just immediately failing is by refusing to presuppose, for argument's sake, the joint compossibility of the two.
Mm-hmm.
Another way I think it fails, though, is similar to the argument we saw earlier, where there's a tacit premise. And it goes like this. Evolutionary data, or biological data at least, does show us that there's no good mechanism at hand for how you would get a male offspring from a female human without some sort of male propagation involved. And that's true. Like, we don't see any good reason and mechanism for how that would come to pass.
Yeah, granted.
Therefore, it didn't happen. Well, not so fast. You need to have a second premise there, something along the lines of, if there's not any sort of physical mechanism whereby it could occur, then it can't occur. Those two premises, if no physical mechanism can't occur, biology shows us no good physical mechanism, therefore it can't occur, that would be a valid argument. But why in the world would we accept that second premise? It seems smuggled in. And if you have that second premise, of course there's a tension, but why in the world would we accept it?
Yeah, totally. We shouldn't. It's gone.
Yeah, right.
It's out of there. Right? Yeah.
So that's the thought. You do find this objection raised, like, how do you explain a virgin birth? And then the microphone is dropped and, the guy's carried out of the room in victory. And I always think to myself, it's easy. Like, if you grant me the starting principles in this question about the coherence or contingency of the worldviews, it's easy to do so.
Yeah, exactly. It's easy, right? Like, given that assumption, and of course you might want to challenge that assumption all day long, but you're right. If you're understanding the dialectical context here, if that's already on the table, then like, this is just, it's just so not an issue. It's just really, it's really not. Yeah. Good. Awesome. Well, that satisfies my intellect quite adequately. So
I can see, sorry.
No, go ahead. Yeah, that wasn't going anywhere important with that, believe me.
I could see an interlocutor saying, put on his hat. And I think, what's he going to say here? And one thing I could say in response to our discussion so far is, you keep shifting away from the hard question by saying it's not dialectically appropriate at the moment to ask that question. To me, not to you. That's what someone could say here. And I feel the force of that. I mean, after all, these are good questions too. Like, if you think there's an argument against a creator God, that's a good thing to consider, because it doesn't just get the Christians, it gets all sorts of people. So it's definitely a good thing for us to consider. But we're talking about like this book right here and what we did in this book. And it's not unfair for me to focus our discussion on the question, is there a tension between the findings of evolutionary biology and Christianity? That's a legitimate question that lots of folks ask. If the objector wants us to instead focus elsewhere, I think the best thing for us to say here is, indeed, we should, and we will. But for now, at least, keep the conversation where the conversation started, and let's talk about the book project.
Yeah, really important. And it's not like there's I think for some of these there is just an easy answer, an easy out, but not all of them, right? I mean, some of them you really got to think about, or even just give an extreme example. If somebody just is committed to a position, put Christianity aside, has a religious position that the world is just 1,000 years old, and physics tells us a different story, there's a tension there, right? A big one, and perhaps one that cannot be resolved. So yeah, it's not like there's an easy out to all of these. So just keeping an eye out for those who want to smuggle in something that should not be smuggled in, some philosophical contraband or whatever.
And in that scenario, you probably don't know anybody who thinks that the world is only 1,000 years old. But in this scenario, you probably know quite a number of people who think that science and religion are inconsistent. And so it's not like we're inventing a new problem to really kick its butt. We went to the world and saw, where are people objecting to Christian faith? And lots of objections come from under the banner of science. And so here we wanted to say, well, let's look at those objections and see whether they work. It seems to us, as we argue in the book, it seems to us that it doesn't work. So
it's good.
We haven't yet got us. So the subtitle could be, you haven't yet shown us wrong, people. And it's you haven't yet shown that science is inconsistent with Christian faith.
And again, that's super useful. And that's why I like to do like the all disappointment arises from improperly set expectations, or so they tell me. But there's a real useful place for this, of just alleviating tensions. And then it's just a different project altogether of whether there's, more good positive reasons to pick up Christianity or belief in God or or whatever. So, and that's been a lot of a lot of your work is just work that is sort of defensive, especially in Christology and stuff like that. But that doesn't mean that, not to speak for you, but I'm willing to guess that it doesn't mean that you don't have or care about, positive reasons to be a Christian at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of doing work for the Lord's church is just, I think C.S. Lewis uses this image, seeing where the walls have the weakest line and then putting yourself there to try to defend it. And I think that's a lot of what I and probably lots of other Christian philosophers do, is we look and see where we see a real difficulty. We think, I don't see anybody answering that the way I think it ought to be answered. It would be a help for the church to defeat the defeaters against it here. And so off we go. That's basically my sort of decision procedure for these sorts of projects, my defensive projects.
Yeah, a noble project indeed, Dr. Pawl. So thank you for engaging it. All right, last thing I want to talk about today is, this is your wheelhouse, right? You talk about the fundamental philosophical problem of the incarnation in this book. So what is that? How does it relate to the wider project that is this book? And let's take that up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what we wanted to do in the dialectic for the book was present as clearly as we could. First, just what the viable views are for the relation between science and religion generally.
Mm-hmm.
And then zoom in on not just that big old project, but zoom in on particular Christian beliefs, traditional Christian beliefs, and evolutionary biology. That was chapter 2 was like here's what all the views are. Chapter 3 is here's what the Christian views are. And chapter 4 is here's what the biological views are.
Yeah.
So in chapter 3, one thing we wanted to do is do an immediate defeat of some of the most egregious defeaters out there. Because after all, if you can show, if your opponent says, fine, I'll grant you the truth of Christianity and I'll grant you the truth of biology, and we'll see if they're in conflict. But in his mind, he's got all day long, this is just a trite exercise because I know Christianity is false because there's this glaring contradiction in it. That's not going to be super useful for him. So we tried to defeat the immediate defeaters. Good. We did the biology section too. One of the immediate defeaters for Christianity is this view that, hey, if you guys are right, there's one person who's both God and man, but there can't be one person who's both God and man, so you guys are wrong. And if you say, wait a second, buddy, that second premise is there can't be one person who's both God and man. Why think that? Typically, they respond with some sort of conflict, a fundamental philosophical contradiction between being God and being a man. And that argument goes like this. Anything that's God has this very fancy prerogative, omniscience, omnipotence, eternality, necessity. Anything that's human lacks that very fancy prerogative. Nothing can both have and lack a feature at the same time, at least. Mm-hmm. And so nothing can be both God and man. So what the Christian has to do is find some way to respond to that argument that was put in defense of the claim nothing can be both God and man. Because if you allow that premise, of course, Christianity is hosed. It's totally destroyed.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah. It's a shame nobody's ever thought about that before.
Right. Yeah. The problem with that project, and I worked through that in my 2016 book, In Defense of Conciliar Christology. The problem there was it's not like nobody's ever thought of it, and I had like a fresh terrain, an unmowed lawn to deal with. It's instead everybody's thought about it.
Literally everybody, right?
Ways of talking about it, and problems each direction. And so I spent a lot of time just trying to work through, how do we solve this? And I remember I said earlier, is a certain sort of person who wakes up in a cold sweat. Like I remember reading through the doctrinal claims of the Catholic Church and finding a place where they say, and the Orthodox affirm this council too, it's the Seventh Council, Second Nicaea. They say one in the same person is both, and there's a colon in the English translation, colon, and then 5 apparently contradictory conjunctions, passable and impassable, understandable and ununderstandable, expressible in writing and inexpressible in writing. 5 of these in a row. I put my head down and I was like, oh gosh,
I've got some work to do.
How can it be this way? So, you find that you might despair for a little bit.
Time to sign up for some paraconsistent logic.
And people do,
Yeah.
So anyway, I found this fundamental philosophical problem. It's not like I discovered it; it was there, But I read myself into it. I read myself into a place where I didn't see how I could get I could take many of the options that were available to people. And so I had to try to form a way of doing it that affirmed all the doctrine I was supposed to and avoided all the anathemas I was supposed to avoid. And I did. And then later, I talked with Richard Cross, a dear friend of mine, and he thinks you can find this sort of view all throughout the tradition. So I never claimed novelty to it. And I'm kind of happy that it's not novel because, it's treacherous.
I agree. Novelty makes me nervous. maybe a little bit of refinement around edges, like that's cool, right? But like if I come up with something that was like totally new, I'm almost definitely wrong.
Yeah, I've never read an article in Philosophy of Religion where the abstract says, here's a novel solution to blank, and the solution has been both novel and satisfactory.
Yeah, right.
Every novel solution is just a reinvention of some prior heresy, in my estimation.
Yeah, or just not a solution.
Or not a solution.
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah. Okay, well, what is your preferred solution to this, by the way? You can give us that. You can give us the brief summary because people remember we've done a whole episode on Christology before, so they can dig it up. It's there, but just by way of brief reminder, how do you think people should start to think about alleviating the tension? Yeah.
Well, if you remember the premises I gave were anything divine is this way and nothing human is that way, the same thing. So nothing is both divine and human, and that's a problem for Christianity, of course. And I think those first two premises are sort of beyond reproach. God is that way, for omniscient or omnipotent, or take your pick. And I think humans typically have the contrary, or what seems to be the contrary of that feature. Humans are limited in knowledge, limited in power. So the only premise to point at as the culprit is the one thing can't be both premise. And that one might be the only one you walk in the door and the atheists and the Christians high five about right off the bat, because it seems like it's beyond reproach to think nothing can be both. So what I wanted to do was give a way of understanding those features such that nothing with only one nature could be both, and you and I have only a human nature. But anything with more than one nature, Christ has a divine and a human nature, anything with more than one nature could be both. And so I gave a way of understanding terms like impassible or omniscient or omnipotent, such that they're not a contradictory with passible or limited in knowledge or limited in power if a thing has more than one nature. So that was the general structure of the approach. And if you'd like, I can get into the specifics of how I stated those so that there wasn't a contradiction. But maybe I'll pause here just to make sure that that you're tracking.
Yeah, no, I'm tracking. That sounds great to me. If you want to give just a few more specifics, that's fine. But again, I'll remind people that we do have a full episode on it. But yeah, totally up to you, Dr. Pawl.
Yeah. Let me give you an analogy, and then it'll make it clearer, I think. Yep. In the 2016 book, I wrote about a cheerleader with only one arm. So suppose for argument's sake, you're in a world, or you live somewhere where everybody has only one arm. And if you say here, I refuse to suppose it, that's not right. Everybody has two arms, you dope, or at least many of us do. I'll just remind you that in a dialectic, when your opponent says suppose for argument's sake P, the proper thing to do is just suppose for now P. So
we have our first caller, yeah.
Right. Someone's calling in to say I'm wrong. It's probably someone calling about my roof. I get those calls all the time now.
Oh yeah, all the time.
Scam calls. Okay, I digress. You're in a world, everybody has one arm, but shh, just go with it for now. In that world, you might have predicates like arm bent and arm unbent, such that to be arm unbent is to have an arm that's extended with no bend in it, and to be arm bent is to have an arm that's, say, bent at more than 90-degree angles. So I'm now arm unbent. Sorry, I'm now arm bent. I'm now arm unbent. In a world where everybody has one arm, no one could be both arm bent and arm unbent. You see why? If everybody has only one arm, there's no way at the same time you can fulfill the conditions for being both bent more than 90 degrees and not bent more than 90 degrees.
Yeah.
So it would be impossible for one-armed people to be both of those. And in such a situation, you might expect that we would just form our logic and our assumptions based on that. We would just assume if he's arm bent, then he's not arm unbent. We might even assume it's necessarily so, because after all, we've only ever seen one-armed people, and they are all such that they're either one or the other, but not both. But if you zoom in some third person, an astronaut comes in, an alien comes in, he's got two arms. well, it's going to kind of break our tacit assumptions we made about the interrelations between being arm bent and arm unbent.
Mm-hmm.
Because after all, he could be, and how it's hard to show on my screen. I'm like a sprinkler.
Yeah. Same.
He could be both.
Hulk Hogan pose. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, right. Oh, right. Yeah, he could be both. And so the point I want to make here is this: as with arms, so with natures, and as with arm bent and arm unbent, so with passible and impassible, or mutable and immutable. To be immutable, I think we should understand the fathers to have meant to have a nature that's unable to be changed.
Mm-hmm.
And to be impassible is to have a nature that's unable to be causally affected, and so on down the line for all those predicates.
Mm-hmm.
And to be mutable is to have a nature that can be affected. I've got this flesh and blood thing, you can causally affect it. And so, to be immutable is to have a nature that can be changed, and this nature can be changed. I mean, look at this arm waving around.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if it's possible for a thing to have two natures, one of which is causally affectable and the other of which is not, it's possible for that very thing to satisfy the truth conditions for both predicates being impassible because of his divine nature and being passible because of the human nature. Just like it's possible for one person to satisfy both predicates arm bent and arm unbent if that person has two arms. So that's the basic structure of the response. It's to understand the predicates those church fathers used in a manner that doesn't immediately make them saying really dumb things when they say one and the same person is both passible and impassible.
Yeah, and chances are they weren't really dumb, right? You can't put down a sentence like that and like right. Yeah. And not like at least like wonder like whether this makes any coherent sense whatsoever, right? So
right.
Probably some more subtle thought in the back of a lot of their minds, to be sure. I mean, I'm a big fan of your project. I think it's good. I'm sure you've heard this, and it's a common thing. Somebody might say that's really strange, right? That's really strange, Dr. Pawl might. But like if God is how Christians understand him, that God is not just unique, but uniquely unique. I don't think strangeness should be so like surprising to us when we start thinking about God, and especially if God can assume a human nature and stuff like that. I don't know. Is there anything that you like to say in response to the sort of incredulous stare, maybe response like that?
Yeah.
Like, okay, you've avoided the contradiction, but man, that's just weird.
Yeah, I concede entirely the claim that it's weird. Suppose it weren't. Suppose it were pedestrian and mundane and normal. That would mean we've got some sort of understanding in our like pre-theological vocabulary for this sort of thing happening. It wouldn't be like a super wondrous thing. It'd be a thing we're like, oh, right, I know about that. That happens every Thursday. So I think if the charge is you just laid out a really, really strange and peculiar ontological sort of story, I think anything that satisfies the description, a case where God becomes man, should be a case of a really weird and peculiar ontological story. And to the extent that it's mundane and humdrum, to that extent you failed to capture what's going on when a God becomes man.
That should make you suspicious, right? Yeah. Good, excellent. This has been fantastic, Dr. Pawl. I want to not only thank you for your time, but I want you to make sure that you mention both books again. So the one we've been mostly talking about today here is Jesus and the Genome. So people should obviously have an idea of some of the contents. There's a lot in there. So if you want to just kind of maybe tease about what else people can find in that book and where the best place to get it is, and then make sure you also remind us one more time of the new companion as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. I'll start one step earlier than both those steps. Thank you for this. I also, as you know, have a Substack, which I had meant to mention earlier, but I just forgot to.
Yeah, the talk of the town over on Substack now. Awesome, yeah. Welcome to the club. Yeah.
I mentioned it because I want to shamelessly plug it, but also
please, yeah, I'm gonna make sure I link it too. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I'm doing a series on this book on that right now. Mm-hmm. And so right now, this coming week, I will post on the virgin birth, and you'll get a bit more content about what we say in the book about the virgin birth and how to understand it. So the next thing down the line is the evolutionary biology bit and morality. So that's coming down the line too. So if you're interested in this sort of thing, check out the Substack as well.
It's got a great name, the Pauline epistles.
Right. Once you figure out,
love a good Paul.
Once you figure out you could do that, it's kind of hard not to do it.
Of course, you have to indulge. That's good.
Yeah. So this the main plug for this book is the following. A lot of people think that evolutionary biology precludes Christianity if you really care about affirming what the biological data shows us. And so we just went into detail with the biological data, had a evolutionary biologist, properly credentialed. He's got his own lab he works in. He wrote some of it from the Galapagos Islands. We were zooming him from the Galapagos Islands, and he's doing work out there with turtles and such. So he's the real deal.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah,
it's the real deal. And we just had him give the most robust telling of evolutionary biology you can give, where you do have an evolutionary story for humans. We wanted to give the strongest of that, and then a traditional understanding of Christology, where we're not sneaking parts away that are suspicious, but we're just saying, here's the Christology.
Yeah, here it is.
Here's what the church teaches. And then we asked, what are the ways people argue that they're inconsistent to these two things? And we talked about a couple of them today. We do a worldview talk as well. Like, here's the worldview of naturalism. Here's the worldview of the Christian. How do these fit with the evolutionary data? I think it's pretty fun to see how they stack up, and how you might think that naturalism isn't particularly well supported from the evolutionary data. It's probably not a surprise that just evolutionary data alone doesn't tell you that there is no God and nothing like God. It'd be shocking if the evolutionary data alone could get you to derive there is no such thing as God. But some people claim it can. So we tried to assess those arguments for and against it. Mm-hmm. So that was the plan with that book. And this book,
there it is.
This came out pretty recently, guys. And I'm super excited about it. Again, it was me and Mike Peterson for this book. He's a great editor. He edited the Journal of Faith and Philosophy for, I don't know, 1 billion years, something like that, over 25 years. And in fact, because of all his hard work, the Society of Christian Philosophers named the Service Award after Mike Peterson.
Wow, yeah, awesome.
So he's just wonderful. He knows how to edit quite well. It's a well-oiled machine working with him. Beatrice Reel is an editor at Cambridge, and she wrote to me saying, hey, would you like to edit the Cambridge Companion to Christology? To which I wrote back, I would love to, but I am a philosopher by training, not a theologian, and I could see it rankling some feathers if it's a philosopher who edits that book on Christology.
Yeah.
And she said, fear not, we want it to be philosophical in nature. And so I was like, wonderful, happy to do it. I brought Mike in on it because he's so good at this sort of project. Mm-hmm. And then it was like putting together a dream team, which is super.
Yeah, I was going to say, what a powerful lineup you have here.
Yeah, it's super exciting. We're asking a bunch of friends too. One benefit was we could reach out to people all over in theology and say, hey, you're a big deal in historical theology. Who do you think we should reach out to do this sort of thing? And we tried to get a fairly representative sample of different sorts of theological beliefs, none to all different sorts of types, different stages in career development, different ecclesial traditions. And so I think I'm really proud of how it all came together. I'm looking forward to reading through my fingers the reviews that come out for in the theological journals about the book.
Yeah, excellent. I can only imagine that they will be excellent. Like I said, I haven't had a chance to dive into this yet, but it's a really impressive line of contributors. So I'm looking forward to it. So Dr. Pawl, thank you so much for taking the time. Gentle listeners, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Be sure to head over to Dr. Pawl's Substack. Grab yourself a copy of both these books. It's going to be right up the alley of so many listeners here. And great time. Thank you again. I hope we could do this again soon.
Yes, thank you so much.